Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a question that seems simple on the surface, but is just incredibly complex underneath. Where does our intelligence actually come from? Is it all locked away in our genes? And, maybe more importantly, how much of what we think we know is just plain wrong?
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start by asking if it's even possible to measure something as slippery as genius. Then we'll bust a huge myth about so-called smart genes, take a hard look at the pretty scary reality of genetic editing, and wrap it all up by exploring just how much of who we are comes down to our environment and, just pure random chance.
Okay, let's get right into it. And we're going to start with a piece of old folklore that I'm willing to bet you've heard before. It really gets to the core of this whole thing.
Yeah, that one. The idea that you inherit your smarts from your mom. But is there any actual genetic truth to that? We are definitely going to find out. But first, we've got to tackle an even bigger question.
Because, you see, before we can figure out where intelligence comes from, we kind of have to agree on how to even measure it. And, well, that's where things get really tricky.
So way back when, researchers noticed something kind of weird. People who were really good at one kind of mental test, say verbal puzzles, also tended to be really good at totally different ones, like spatial reasoning or math. This strong connection hinted that maybe there was a single underlying engine of intelligence at work. They called it the general intelligence factor, or G factor for short.
Okay, so where do IQ tests fit in? Think about it like this. Say you want to find the best hockey players. You could watch every single game, scout every player, or you could just have them all run a 100-meter dash. Now, sprinting isn't hockey, right? But it's a pretty decent predictor of athletic potential. An IQ test is a lot like that sprint. It's not intelligence itself, but it's a proxy, a shortcut that happens to correlate with it pretty well. All right, so keeping that proxy idea in mind, let's circle back to that original question about where our intelligence comes from and see what the genetics actually tell us.
So, that big one, is intelligence inherited just from your mom? The science on this is crystal clear. Absolutely not. It's a total myth. The idea came from a wrong assumption that all the important intelligence genes live on the X chromosome. The reality is intelligence is what we call a polygenic trait. That means it's not about one or two smart genes, it's about thousands of them, all working together in incredibly complex ways, and you get them from both of your parents, scattered all across your chromosomes.
And that complexity, well, it's exactly why this chart looks the way it does. Even with all of our amazing modern genetic technology, we can only explain a tiny slice of why IQ scores vary from person to person. The huge majority of it? It's still a big black box, a mix of genes we haven't found yet, your environment, and just random luck. And here is probably the most important takeaway from all of this. For any one individual person, for you, a genetic score for intelligence is pretty much meaningless. These are just broad probabilities for huge populations. Your DNA might hint at a certain potential, sure, but it's just that, a probability, not your destiny. This genetic lottery idea takes us into some very, very deep and murky ethical waters, especially when we start talking about the technology to not just select, but to actively edit human embryos for traits like intelligence.
The story of the CRISPR babies from 2018 is a massive cautionary tale. A scientist in China used gene editing tools on human embryos, claiming he was trying to give them immunity to HIV. But the experiment was justifiably condemned by the entire world. It wasn't just unethical, it was also a technical mess, leading to unpredictable, mosaic results in the twins who were born. The global consensus was that there was no good medical reason for this. It was just a reckless race to be first. And here's where it gets really chilling. Later on, other scientists suggested that the very gene he edited might also be linked to memory and cognition. This is a perfect example of a huge risk in genetics called pleiotropy. It's the idea that a single gene can affect many, many different traits, often in ways we can't predict.
A famous Russian experiment with foxes shows this danger in stunning detail. For decades, scientists bred them for just one single thing, being friendly to humans. And it worked. The foxes became as tame and playful as puppies. But weird things started happening. Their valuable silver fur got patchy, their ears got floppy, and their tails started to curl up. By selecting for one thing, they accidentally changed a dozen others.
And all of this leads us to our final and, maybe the most important piece of this entire puzzle. Because even if you could somehow build the perfect set of genes, that's still not the whole story. Not by a long shot.
Our environment, our upbringing, and just plain luck play an absolutely enormous role. So just how much does environment matter? Well, studies of identical twins who were separated at birth give us a pretty clear number. A twin who grows up in a high-resource, supportive home will, on average, score 5 to 10 IQ points higher than their genetic identical twin who was raised in a lower-resource home. That difference? That's the power of nurture, right there.
And it goes even deeper. It gets even weirder than that. There's this whole field called epigenetics. It studies how your life experiences can leave these little chemical marks or tags on your DNA. Think of it like writing notes in the margins of a book. The actual text of the book, your DNA, doesn't change, but the notes you add can completely change how the story is read and understood.
And this isn't just a theory. A tragic real-world example is the Dutch hunger winter during World War II. Babies who were still in the womb while their mothers were starving had epigenetic changes happen to them. Their bodies were essentially programmed to expect a world of scarcity. Decades later, living in a time with plenty of food, these same people had much higher rates of obesity and other metabolic diseases. Their mother's environment had left a permanent mark.
So when you put all these pieces together, you realize something really profound. This immense, messy, beautiful diversity that we have in the human population, it isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's our species' single greatest strength. It is our ultimate insurance policy against a future that we can never, ever predict.
Which leaves us with one final and kind of haunting question. If we ever get the power to truly direct our own evolution, what vital strengths might we accidentally erase in the process? In trying to select for one narrow version of being smart, we could lose the very things like creativity or resilience or empathy that actually make us human. The lesson from those foxes is so clear. When you start pulling on one genetic thread, you just never know what else is going to unravel. Thanks for watching.